Hello and welcome to Lab Roots, The Life of Her Mind, an interview series devoted to learning about how women think about their research, their field, and their future. My name is Mia Wood. I'm a professor of philosophy working at the intersection of philosophy and, well, everything else, especially the sciences. The first season of The Life of Her Mind originally aired in 2022 and 2023 on Lab Roots' YouTube channel. Now, in 2025, I'm excited to announce that we're bringing the series back. The podcast will continue to explore the lives, careers, and minds of women in and across the sciences around the globe. For our 8th episode, I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Stephanie Poindexter, a biological anthropologist at the University of Buffalo, specializing in primates. Dr. Poindexter conducts field, lab, and desk-based research into how primates use and navigate their habitats. More specifically, Dr. Poindexter investigates primate movement, morphology, and cognition. Of particular interest to her is the slow loris. Dr. Poindexter investigates how the environment, other animals, and its own cognitive and physical capacities influence the nocturnal slow loris's movement. In addition to her academic research, Dr. Poindexter's work facilitates primate conservation. So tune in to the 8th episode of The Life of Her Mind to learn what and how Dr. Poindexter thinks. Let's find out about the life of her mind. For more information on Dr. Poindexter's work and links to resources, check out our show notes. Hello and welcome to Lab Roots, The Life of Her Mind, an interview series devoted to learning how women think about their research, their field, and their future. Let's get started. Today, we are in conversation with Dr. Stephanie Poindexter, biological anthropologist at the University of Buffalo, who specializes in primatology. Dr. Poindexter conducts field, lab, and desk-based research into how primates use and navigate their habitats. More specifically, Dr. Poindexter investigates primate movement, morphology, and cognition. In addition, Dr. Poindexter's work facilitates primate conservation. The slow loris is one primate species of particular interest to Dr. Poindexter. She investigates how the environment, other animals, and its own cognitive and physical capacities influence the nocturnal slow loris's movement. Hello, Dr. Poindexter, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. It's exciting work that you do. I'm excited to discuss it. There's so much to talk about. It's hard to know where to begin. So maybe we can just begin with your origin story and go from there.
Of course. And hello back, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about Floroses.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of an origin story, I'd say it had to do a lot with my childhood and spending a lot of time at the Brookfield Zoo growing up. So I'm from Chicago, and it's one of the major zoos near Chicago. My dad was really interested in it, and it was like a regular outing for us. And we always spent a lot of time in the primate house. And so I got experience sort of watching primates from an early age and kind of being fascinated by like how similar they were to us. But then when I went to university, I was sort of dead set on going to medical school. So I started undergrad as a pre-medical student, but I wanted to kind of take a different approach, not just be a bio major or a physics major or like a chemistry major. And so I became an anthropology major. And as a student in the anthropology department, we of course have to take lots of courses across the field. Mm-hmm. And one of the first classes I took as a freshman was human evolution. And the first third of that class was just dedicated to primates and primate evolution. And I think it was in that moment that I realized, I was like, oh, I didn't realize this was a career path. I didn't know that there were, tons of people whose jobs were to study primates. And it kind of took me back to spending all that time watching primates as a child. And I was like, oh, this might suit me better than working in hospitals. And so I stopped being a pre-med student and then just sort of focused on primate studies and research in primatology.
So you had this interest. Yeah, I mean the primate is just a fascinating creature for me anyway, for the reason that you mentioned. We see ourselves right in these creatures. But then there's this moment that I find particularly fascinating, because I think it happens to so many people who are going on one path that's known to them for whatever reason. And then they realize, oh, I didn't know that I could do this. This is what what I want to do. When, if I can piggyback off that just a little bit, am I right to think that when you said, oh, this is what I want to do, did you then, presumably kind of with the same focus, did you say, okay, I need to find out how I pursue this as my future? Or did you seek out mentors? Were they already built in? How did that work?
Oddly enough, I think I laugh about this all the time, but I went to Washington University in St. Louis for my undergraduate degree. And initially I decided to go to that university because the WashU medical school is at the time was like the second best medical school in the country. And so I thought, oh, that would create lots of opportunities for me to do some research at the medical school. And this is going to be great when I eventually want to apply to medical school. But another thing that Washington University in St. Louis has is an anthropology department with 3 or 4 primatologists. And that is an unusual, well, there are very few departments that have such an emphasis on primatology. And so it just feels like this serendipitous moment in that the thing I thought I wanted to do, this is what drew me to WashU, but the thing that I ended up doing and really loved doing was also like a strong part of what they did at that university. And so I didn't have to search far, I'll say that. And so I did have mentors and asked lots of questions, and there were lots of opportunities to do research while I was an undergrad in primate studies. And honestly, I can't imagine where else I could have gone where the transition would be as easy as it was. And so it was just like a very random coincidence.
But as you say, a serendipitous one, a really good one.
Yeah.
So when you first started studying the non-human primates, and you were going back to this point about the fascination with how similar they are to us, what do you remember? What surprised you the most about them, maybe just as a group, and the least? Does that make sense?
Sure. As a kid, I'd say most of the media sort of portrayed like larger apes as being sort of scary, and like there's Godzilla that's terrorizing the city. But at the Burkefield Zoo, there were a troop of gorillas, and they were all very caring. And especially there's like there are young individuals in the group, and you kind of saw the way that my family cared for me, they were caring for their young. And so as a kid, I remember finding that very fascinating. And then growing up, like studying primates in like more of an academic setting, I think some of the things that I found so surprising were like our gaps in knowledge, or like how we know so much about some primates, but then nearly nothing about others. I found that really fascinating. And then I also found it interesting how much non-human primates, like how much humans sort of influence the way primates behave now.
Oh.
And I think that's probably why I became interested in primate conservation. But it was just sort of seeing how everything was sort of linked together. Like we're influencing them. They're much different than they're portrayed in the media. And there's just a lot of us in non-human primates as well. So I don't know, I think it was just all of the overlapping similarities that really struck me.
So I think we'll talk a bit about your conservation work, which is related presumably to your study of motion, specifically in the slow loris. But if I may press a little bit more on the fact of knowledge gaps. Is it in the field? Is it the case that researchers say, hey, we don't know a bunch of stuff here, here, and here, and kind of the profession tries to develop researchers to go in those areas? Or is it, I guess I'm thinking at the kind of the professional association level, like do people try to coordinate their research in any way to try to fill the gaps, which would presumably improve knowledge overall?
I think we could probably do a better job of that. It isn't as structured as you kind of describe it, but there are definitely people who make an effort to entice students or to sort of convey the importance of filling these knowledge gaps. But the way that these gaps sort of emerge is also somewhat natural in that people first started studying primates really to learn about humans. And so then you look for the species that are probably more comparable and a better model for how humans may have evolved. And so that naturally leads you to great apes. And then we go further and further back. And it's like, oh, well, what's present in great apes? Oh, maybe we should look at different monkey species to see how they negotiate their environments or how they solve problems and how social they are, to say what's unique in apes, then we can say what's unique in humans. And so we go further and further back. And I study a species that's thought to have more characteristics that resemble the mammal we evolved from than, human species today. And so I think with time, those gaps will continue to be filled as we have more primatologists, more resources, more technologies to be able to tackle some of the questions that we couldn't answer before, just from direct observations or places we didn't have access to. And so I think there's all sorts of reasons why we have these gaps, and there are people who sort of champion strepsirrhines, which are the type of primates I study, and they're trying to encourage people to study them. But there's always going to be, I think, a big draw and a lot of work that focuses on those well-known species, because the more information the better questions you can ask. And so that it's the cycle that's just going to perpetuate itself.
And how did you find your way to the slow loris? I love, so I just have a wildly superficial picture in my mind of them, and the name, the slow part of it, right, suits them, right? And it never occurred to me to ask, well, why do they move the way they do, and related questions. How did you find your way to them? And if you don't mind, what I find particularly interesting about our various relatives is the connection between cognitive capacities. And I recognize that your study involves specifically the relationship between motion and cognitive capacities, motion and other relations as well, but I'm focusing on cognition. How did you get there, and what is that connection that you found between, for example, their cognitive capacities and the way they move?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I came to Stolorises via my PhD advisor. She was also my master advisor, Dr. Anna Nakaris. She runs a little Fireface project, and it's funny when I think about that as well, because I was actually introduced to her before I physically met her or realized she was going to be my advisor. So while I was doing primate studies as an undergraduate, one of my professors would always go through all the primate types and species and then introduce us to researchers working on them. And so I remember seeing a picture of her in one of these lectures because, she's one of the few people who've been studying slow lorises for as long as she has. And then I decided to go to Oxford Brookes University for a master's, and then she became my advisor and introduced me to all of the the conservation plights, the welfare plights, the gaps in our understanding of slow lorises, and also how unique they are when it comes to primates. And so I think it was I honestly don't think I would be studying slow lorises if I had never met Dr. Nakaris. So she's definitely the vector for me getting into this research. But it was absolutely the idea that we're making this, we have all of these individuals. A lot of them are in rescue centers, or because they're threatened, their wild populations are threatened. And they're really popular in the pet trade. And so a lot of them ended up in rescue centers. And so we had all of these animals, all of these primates, but there isn't a clear understanding of how we can get them back into the wild successfully.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that was very enticing to me, like having a question like a big question that needed answering. And I think that's like the basis for most researchers, like this desire to answer questions. And then Slow Loris has just presented this opportunity where it's just like we really need more people to work on these questions. And so, raised my hand, signed up, and here I am still today. But in terms of relating it back to their cognitive capacity and the things that I'm sort of interested in there is that when we think about primate evolution, for a very long time, like your cognitive capacity was really linked to solving social problems, like living in a group.
Mm-hmm.
And so larger diurnal day living primates are obviously thought of as like higher primates or being more intelligent because they're, dealing with all of these individuals and there's lots of social interactions that they have to keep track of.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also the idea that cognitive capacity can be linked to solving ecological problems. Mm. So finding food or using tools to manipulate your environment, but getting resources that you need to survive. And so for a time, I think that there was more evidence to support social cognition being like the driver of primate evolution. But there's definitely in the last, 10 years or so, a kind of a resurgence in thinking about ecological problems as a driver for cognitive capacity. And from that perspective, we can look across all animals and all primate types because, yes, lorises are they're not living in large groups the same way as, chimpanzees might be, but they do still have social interactions, but they're absolutely solving ecological problems. And so the way I think about movement is that you need to get to these resources. You need to have an understanding of where you live so that you can survive. And so the direct tie with cognition is thinking about spatial cognition. And so how individuals move within large spaces. And so that's kind of the broad question that drives a lot of the work that I do. And there's all sorts of little pieces within that we still need to figure out to get a better look at the whole picture, I'd say.
And is it the case? So there are a number of things that jump out, but I'll pick this one if it's
Sure.
okay. It maybe is one path to the conservation issue. So I'll say it, and then before I forget, I wanted to also mention I didn't realize that the slow loris is among primates a popular pet is endangered, maybe partly for that reason, but also because mm-hmm. of its habitat. But so that's maybe a parallel. That's a parallel way into conservation, which you've mentioned. But I was thinking specifically about your point that rather than focus exclusively on cognition vis-a-vis social engagements and the social structure, but also on navigating one's environment just to survive. Is it fair? Is it not a correct way to think about, let's say, about evolution? Because this would apparently happen faster than evolution goes at its sort of normal pace. But is it the case that we've seen or are seeing the slow loris adapt to changes in the environment that are not natural, but rather human-made? Does that make sense? And is that, yeah?
Yeah, it absolutely makes complete sense, and they do.
Oh, cool.
Yes, they're actually so different populations, obviously in different places, are going to have different responses to anthropogenic influences. Mm-hmm. But in some of the populations that I've studied or seen, they are responding to changes, whether it's they're used to a certain route following certain trees throughout the night, and one of those trees gets cut down, and so they adjust their route, or whether it's perhaps there was a big gap because there's lots of farmland, and then over time, the farmers are building frames to grow different gourds or other sorts of agricultural products, and then the slow lorises start to use those frames to cross those gaps. They are problem solvers. Like, I would say, probably most animals are problem solvers to exist in this challenging world. But they're absolutely adapting and changing to human influence. Even like the main population at the Little Fireface Project is in a montane agroforest. And so with the expansion of agricultural land use, people are moving into higher and higher altitudes. And that is where most of the forested area remains in highly populated places. And so they're typically a lowland species, or they evolved as a lowland species, but they're now living in this higher altitude, which has implications for the temperature and how they sort of negotiate being in a colder climate than they may, have been in typically. And not a particular individual, but like generations prior to, or what they may have evolved in. And so they're absolutely living in a different, more human mediated world, but they're figuring out ways to survive in it still.
I'm fascinated by the idea of problem solving, or figuring things out. We typically think of, I believe, right? So any animal as not so if I take, let's say, one of my dogs, right, and I think, okay, so they're going to use their sniffer and their ears. Those are the most powerful sense organs that they have relative to to other ones, and so they're sort of driven by what they smell, what they hear, but. And yes, that is related in some important sense to cognition that I don't pretend to understand, but there's a sort of I don't know if I can say it, sort of agency or intentionality that I think I'm hearing. Is that remotely right to thinking about our primate relatives, in particular, let's say the slow loris?
Yeah, I could say that, in that their goal is to solve the problem. Is that what you mean with intentionality?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because their goal is to get access to resources that are needed to, sustain themselves and to the next day, and so on and so forth. And so I think there is definitely an intentionality. It's hard to really distinguish and attribute sort of future planning to non-human primates or to any animal from that respect. But I mean, I definitely see evidence of them knowing you do something now to reap the benefits later, because one of their main food sources are like exudates from trees. And that isn't something that's just like a fruit hanging there that you grab and eat. You have to scrape away the bark of trees, of a particular tree. And then with time, it starts to produce this exudate. And it's something that they'll come and eat.
Okay. Oh, fascinating. And you mentioned also that earlier that they are a relative of our primate ancestor from which we most directly evolved. Is that?
Maybe not most directly, but if we look throughout primate evolutionary history, like humans and chimpanzees likely shared a common ancestor like 4 to 5 million years ago. But between humans and slow lorises, it's more like 56 million years ago is the last time we had a common ancestor. And so from that perspective, we are farther removed from them. And the slow loris probably shared a common ancestor with other mammals in a smaller time span than they shared a common ancestor with us. So from that perspective, they are more akin to other mammals than to humans.
So going back a bit to the point that you made about conservation, is that so? What would you say is sort of the main challenge? Is it that the slow loris has been grabbed as a pet, or is it that their environment is radically changing, or is it equally both or something else?
I'd say definitely both. I think most biodiversity on the planet is suffering from like deforestation.
Mm-hmm.
Slow lorises are not immune to that problem as well, but they have this other factor sort of intervening in that they have a very cute face. I mean,
They
they
do.
look like a little doll that you might want to have in your home,
Right.
but obviously that's not where they should be. And so they are used as pets. They are used as photo props. So some people may have one in a bar somewhere. You can come and pay and take pictures with it. But they also hold some importance and have been used in varying traditional medicines too. And so deforestation, which is largely a human mediated problem, is definitely affecting their wild populations. But there's also this like more direct human intervention that's causing a decline in their populations as well.
Okay. Is this, well, let me, if I may, I'm going to, oh no, let me piggyback off of that. Given what we are seeing, for example, in climate changes, what are some of the implications of your work for conservation? And forgive me for the haziness of the following question, but I'm really fascinated by the I don't want to call it activism because that's got connotations that we want to arguably want to avoid. But when we think of the scientist, right, we think of this person who's just dispassionately observing and gathering data and drawing conclusions and building a picture of X, Y, and Z, right, so that we've got this collected body of knowledge we call science, right? But there's I don't know if it's more recent than not, but there's a lot of work being done simultaneous with the data gathering and hypothesis testing and so forth to try to protect and conserve and perpetuate biodiversity. So how do you see your role in that part of the project? And I guess it's related to kind of some implications you see for, let's say, the slow loris's future if conservation is successful.
Sure, absolutely. I think of this sort of in two ways. If I was the strictly scientific, detached scientist, and that was the only thing I was interested in, and only wanted to address theoretical questions using slow lorises as a model, even from that perspective, because they are critically endangered, in 30 years there won't be any more to study. And so if I just want to answer questions, my main study subject is now gone. And so even from that more detached perspective, I think conservation should be important to those individuals because they're running on borrowed time, if you will. Mm-hmm. But for me, is the second sort of perspective on that is that slow lorises are more than just a model for answering theoretical questions. They are like an important part of our ecosystem. They're important in terms of understanding like the really beautiful biodiversity that we have on this planet. And so from that perspective, I think that it's sort of our duty to make sure we are doing diligent, rigorous research and science that can be helpful for ensuring that these wild populations persist into the future. Especially because the reason why they aren't doing well is because of us. And so, we kind of have a responsibility to sort of right the ship, if you will.
And so so that leads me to a question about how you do your research, right? So you're out in the field and you study a nocturnal animal. So I have no idea how you manage to not be exhausted all the time because I wouldn't make it. But so you're out in the field because you need to be there, but you also, for educational purposes, for which are related to conservation purposes, you need to be, here, let's say talking to audiences about your work. first, do you have a preference? Like, would you rather be in the field or would you rather be, let's say, in the classroom? And then second, how do you juggle it? Because when I read about your work, my first thought was, just because of how I think about my rest, I was like, oh my gosh, Dr. Poindexter must be exhausted all the time. Plus, on top of that, right, you're working in a high pressure academic environment, right? So how do you, what's your preference? How do you do it?
I would say that both are really important, only because I appreciate being in the field while I'm in campus, and I appreciate being on campus while I'm in the field. Like both of them are very necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I would have said that same thing before the pandemic, but being unable to go back to the field really sort of changed my perspective on it. And so I think both are really important to my balance, so like the sort of balance I try to find between being in the field and all the work that has to happen while I'm back in Buffalo. In terms of balancing it all and being tired all the time.
Sorry to bring that up.
No, that's okay. While we're out there, I mean, it was, to be completely honest, it was a lot easier when I was a little younger, but we switch our sleep cycles, and I actually don't sleep very well during the day. And so I just don't sleep a whole lot while I'm in the field. And because of those obligations that I have with teaching and mentoring students and all of the work that we do while at the university, my field seasons are getting shorter and shorter. And so they're sort of limited to the summer or to January when we haven't started classes yet, or at times we might be able to find funding and opportunities for me to not teach for a semester, and then I can go back to the field for a little longer. But at this point, I'm probably at 6-8 weeks max that we're in the field, where we switch our sleep cycles. Mm-hmm. And that we start observations, or we head out to observations around 5:30 to 6 to get to the lorises before they wake up. And then it tends to be in 2 shifts, where that first shift is from 6 to midnight, and the second shift is from midnight to 6 a.m. And honestly, I kind of like the second shift from midnight to 6 a.m. The forest is a really fun place at night, or it's just quiet and kind of majestic, and you don't really know what's in front of you. And so there's a mystery to it. But yeah, I've definitely been partial to the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, and then you sleep for a couple hours and you carry on.
And you do the same thing. Oh, you're
my
hero.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. Well, and that alone, in other areas too. But you mentioned, if I can piggyback off your comment about the intensification or expansion of your appreciation of field work when you couldn't do it. Mm-hmm. How did you do your work? I mean, I know we were all, in terms of teaching, we're on, Zoom, hi, mm-hmm. But how did you manage your work to be productive, setting aside teaching, when you were unable to go anywhere?
It was definitely a struggle, but I think that doing field work, computational or desk-based work as well, mm-hmm. Was helpful. So I'm not strictly doing field work, and that's the only data and research that I'm doing. And so during that time, we just leaned more into the computational work. And so we're looking at CT scans of different primate species, trying to sort of characterize their nasal cavity geometry. And so a part of this sort of navigating your environment in the wild, after my postdoc, I became really interested in sensory morphology as well, and how primates use their senses. So when I think about the morphology part, and when I broadly talk about my work, it's mostly the limb morphology and sensory morphology, and how those 2 elements help you move and navigate your environment. And so we're looking at the sense of smell, mm-hmm. in different primates, and how the physical shape of your nasal cavity might be tied to like your nasal capacity. And so honestly, I remember getting software to remote access the lab computers. And so the students can like remote use all the software that they needed. And so we did a lot of sort of pivot projects, if you will, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. knowing that we couldn't go, because we had plans to go in the summer of 2020. And once we couldn't do that, it was sort of, all right, well, what exists already that we can use, or what do we already have that we could focus on now? But it was definitely hard as a new PI because I just started in 2020. And so I didn't have the sort of deep data set that you might have created after 5, 10 years of doing field research. But I was very fortunate in that, previous mentors were definitely willing to let me continue working with data sets that I'd previously worked with. But it was sort of, a little bit of a knock where you're like, okay, now I'm going to be independent and start doing this new thing with work that is like my own.
Mm-hmm.
But we made the best of it and just sort of pivoted and leaned more into the computational research. But now we're starting to get back into the field, which is it's nice, and so it'll be a nice balance of things that we're working on.
So speaking of, so two things, right? You were basically shut down only a semester after you had started your tenure track position, and right, and you're also meant to be working with graduate students. They're also shut down, and so they're not getting the field research. So you've got to not only be creative about how you're going to do your work in this new environment, however long it lasts, but also help people who are more or less starting out in their studies, graduate studies. So is it the case, so I know you run your own lab at Buffalo. You supervise a number of graduate students and undergraduate students. So you mentioned a bit about how you made that work. But is it the case that you thought, so you still need to make the experience robust, let's say, for the students you're mentoring? How is what you described just a minute ago kind of partly how you ran your lab while we were all on lockdown, and then now that we've been back out, have you basically taken that same group and you're out in the field? Or how, given that I'm in the humanities, I don't know how labs work really. How does that go?
No, absolutely. So our lab is actually, like, the term lab for us is really just the same as a group. So we're just a research group, and the lab space that we have, I'm using air quotes, is really just sort of this big computational room where we have computers, workstations, places for us to have collective meetings, and places where we store the field equipment. But really, as a unit, we sort of, the best thing that we can do for each other as a unit is sort of support each other's research, help answer questions, find resources, just be another set of eyes on work. Because I've got some students that are strictly focused on working with the CT data. And then I have some students who are only interested in doing field-based research. And so it wasn't necessarily the same people picked up and, stopped doing computational work and went to the field once we could. It was only maybe one or two who got out to the field once we were able to travel. But there are some individuals who are still working with the CT scan data and doing morphological work that is strictly based at UB.
And then is there, so individuals are working on, I guess, if I may call them like threads, research threads. And then is the group, is it the case that part of the aim of the group is to sort of synthesize those threads at various points for themselves and for each other? Is that one way that we can think about it, or is there a better way to think about it?
No, I think that's a great way to think about it, because they are sort of these independent paths that undoubtedly overlap at various points. It really depends on whether or not they're undergraduate students or graduate students, if in fact those threads will at some point intersect, because there's only so much we can do with these varying levels. But absolutely, I think information we gain from looking at these nasal cavities can help inform information or the way that you might interpret data that you get from studying wild populations. Another important thing I'd say in terms of the goal of the lab is how all of those threads can be used in an applied and sort of practical way. And that's through primate conservation. And so while not every thread may intersect with each other within the lab, they definitely all have applications like out in the world of primate conservation.
So two things. One is I would imagine that there are these exciting moments when you've got, the group sitting around, and let's say for one person, there's this moment like, oh, I see something that I didn't see before, and I saw it because I'm looking at the work that you're producing. That must be like super exciting as a discovery moment. But then am I right, given what you've said about conservation, that or I get the sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's there's a level of passion that you have for that, where you see, the benefit of the work in terms of this practical result, that we're not going to lose this species.
Right.
As you say, in 30 years, which we will do if we're not if we're not smart about how to protect the species.
Right. No, absolutely. Yes. No, I think anyone you ask about me would say that I think about the practical aspects of things. And so whenever we're thinking of a project or embarking on a project, I really think it's important, and it is a goal of mine, to make sure that work has practical use outside of the group or outside of academia, outside of the theoretical discourse that might be that it contributes to, but it needs to be useful out where these animals are. And so, yeah, I definitely think contributing to primate conservation in any way, some very small ways, or maybe over, many years, it could be in bigger ways. I just think that is an important sort of frame to think about your work, especially if you're working with, primates, which there are, it's hard. I can't think of many primate species that are doing, well in the wild. Like, their wild populations are just unfazed by any sort of human activity. And so I think that is a universal problem that all primatologists should have, at least some sort of consideration for.
Mm-hmm. And that leads me to my last question, although I will want to know if there are items that you topics that we haven't covered. And I could just, bug you all day with questions because you're super interesting, but I'll try to be responsible. You sort of touched on in this last discussion about, kind of your being practically minded, specifically in your research, practically minded with an eye toward conservation. And you're thinking about short-term and long-term goals. So where do you see your field in, I don't know if it's fair to say 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, how do you see things playing out? What do you think is going to be the most important stuff for us to think about?
I mean, honestly, I think just a lot of these knowledge gaps might begin to be filled, or I'll say, not everything is a misconception, but things that may be misconceptions will come to light because we'll gain more information about these species that we may have made assumptions about, or we tried to generalize, but we find that there's actually more variation within that species or within that sort of environment or within that country. And so I just think with more eyes, on primates and then studying them in the varying places that you find them, we're going to just have a clearer understanding of what we're dealing with. And in turn, that's going to help us understand, how they evolved and how we evolved as well. Because the goal is, or not the goal, but the way we sort of go about it is looking at these current living primate populations and how they deal with changes in their environment. Because changes in an environment is supposed to be one of these big catalysts that led to our own evolution. And so really understanding how we negotiate ecological problems, that relationship between sociality and ecology and behaviors might come from the need to solve both of these issues, I think will really help us understand the whole picture, especially when we look at strepsirrhines. I'm not being biased, though strepsirrhines are my favorite type of primate. But as we look at, that's where a lot of the gaps are. There are gaps throughout most primate types. But especially in nocturnal primates, it's just hard. Like we're saying, you stay up all night. It isn't everyone's cup of tea. Some places that they're in, it isn't safe to be, walking around at night because of large mammals like elephants. But I do think that we're on the verge of filling a lot of these necessary knowledge gaps. Not that all of them aren't important, but there are some key chunks that I think could really turn the tide for how we understand primates as a whole.
Is it fair to ask to identify one of those key areas? Or is it kind of is that too big to kind of, summarize in a sentence or two? Or
well, I just think my answer might be perceived as biased, but I think that nocturnal primates are a big gap, and understanding them better would really inform how we think about all primates.
Okay. And then also like including ourselves, because I think an implicit point that you've made is, you specialize in studying a specific species of primate, understanding in part how it responds to changes in its environment. Well, we're also in the environment, and even if we're the agents of the change, it also affects us. And so, this larger picture then is one that does not discount us and our own, survival.
Absolutely not.
What you've just said, though, if you don't mind, reminds me of another question that I meant to ask, because I was really interested in your teaching philosophy. And I think that's that's kind of been a bit of a thread of in what you've been saying. If I understand it correctly, your teaching philosophy emphasizes both thinking about current anthropology in visionary terms, so in specifically primatology, and as a professional approach to sharing and communicating one's work. So you're thinking about, as you said, sort of a frame, but then so getting people you're educating to think about sort of the larger framework and a vision for our future, and that is something that maybe guides in practical terms the way you're doing the science. Is that fair?
I think so, absolutely, because I don't necessarily see the value in answering a question if you're the only person that's going to know the answer. Right? If it's going to stay with you, then why did we spend the time and the resources to go out and gather that information? And so I think sharing what you know, good, bad, incomplete, is very helpful. And so I do have a strong emphasis on like making abstracts for conferences or practicing how you're going to present your research to experts and to non-expert audiences, because again, as humans have a big role in what affects primate conservation, and as the consumers of most of these things, it isn't helpful for my department to be the only one who knows the work that you've done.
Well, thank you, Dr. Poindexter, for sharing a little bit of your mind and your expertise and your time. I'm grateful to you, and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to chat again, because there's so much more to learn from you. And I'm just very grateful to you for taking some time to chat with us today.
No, it was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
Since our conversation, Dr. Poindexter has continued researching and publishing that research. In addition to 40+ peer-reviewed publications, in 2024, Dr. Poindexter published on topics ranging from climate change and how a nocturnal primate uses space to gibbons as seed dispersers in a Thailand mosaic forest. Be sure to check out our show notes for links to everything Dr. Poindexter has been working on, and see you next season. That's right, season 2 of The Life of Her Mind, which is coming soon.